Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second session in our new series, the Grant and Partnership and Fundraising Development Series. I'm Melanie from the Extension Foundation, and I'm delighted to see so many of you today. If you joined us last time, welcome back. Thank you for taking the time. I'm really excited that we're able to offer this course for our audience. So in this series, we'll have monthly sessions to equip you with tools and tips and support to navigate the evolving world of grants and fundraising. So the topics will build on each other each month. Like I mentioned, this is a series that goes through September. So I hope you can continue to join us. But if you can't, the recordings and resources are sent out and shared by the Extension Foundation. So you can always reference that. So the Extension Foundation is so excited to have Nate Burt here from Silver Maple Strategies as a key informant for our NTA teams this year and also the host of all these sessions. So Nate brings a lot of experience and a lot of enthusiasm to these topics. So I'm so excited to learn from him today and the rest of the year. Just as a reminder, we want this to be an interactive experience where you feel engaged and get the most out of this discussion. So during our time together, I want to encourage you to continue to engage in the chat, unmute yourself, come off if engage in any way that you want to. We'll have plenty of time built in for your questions and comments, so please feel free to do that. So once again, a big thank you to Nate for being here today, and I'll hand it over to him to get started.
Fantastic. Melanie, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. I'm loving all of the comments in the chat to see where you all are from. I know this is an extremely busy time. Melanie and I were talking before we kicked off today, and my wife works at the University of Missouri in the campus writing program. And so this time of year is just such a crunch. So thank you for making the time. If you can't stay around for the whole duration, I think we're here, Melanie, till 2:15 Central. That's right? Okay, great. Getting a head nod. Perfect. Thank you. So we are going to try to make this as interactive as possible. So I want to encourage you, type into the chat, ask questions using the questions function in Zoom, or as Melanie said, raise your hand and we'll make sure to call on you. I'm going to have several sections throughout our conversation today where I'm going to ask you for feedback or input, and look forward to hearing your insights and questions. And then we'll dedicate roughly 20 or 30 minutes, as I'm planning now, toward the end of our session today for questions. I know not all of you probably work in the world of agriculture like I do, but I'm hopeful that regardless of the industries or the clients you serve within Extension, that some of the insights that I share today will be helpful to you. I'm not going to promise you're going to learn anything new per se, but I'm hoping that maybe I can give you some new ways of thinking about how the world of agriculture is changing and what that might mean for you as an extension professional. So I'm going to start today's conversation around the top trends driving ag innovation in 2024 with a quick story. So I worked for about a decade for a company called Farm Journal. Some of you may be familiar with it. And I came to Farm Journal having literally zero background in agriculture. The closest I ever got growing up as a kid in elementary school and high school was visiting my grandparents in Tennessee and Indiana in the country. I didn't know anything about corn or soybeans or livestock. I didn't know about specialty crops. I didn't understand how markets work. And so early on, probably within the first 2 or 3 years of my time at Farm Journal, I had the privilege of getting to serve as managing editor of Top Producer. Now, for those who don't know, Top Producer is a large farm operation brand. This world takes all kinds of farms, right? Big, medium, small, and everywhere in between. This organization, this brand just happened to serve large farm executives. And so I found myself on a road trip to Nebraska. Now, I live in Missouri, so Nebraska's not that far away, but it's different enough that it's like, visiting a foreign country in some senses, right? All the scenery is new, getting to meet new people, ask lots of questions, and try to understand the kinds of issues farmers and others in the agriculture industry are facing. And so one morning I'm driving, I rented a little Honda Fit or some little skateboard car that was like ocean blue. And I'm driving this down the back country gravel roads, and I arrive at the farm of Rorik Paulman. If you live in Nebraska, you may know Rorik. He and his wife, Deb, started off basically losing their farm and then rebuilding it from scratch. and a really tremendous story. At the time, Rorik and his family were operating over multiple thousands of acres, very diversified operation, crops, specialty, beans, lentils. I think he even experimented with, chia and some of those kinds of specialty grains. And I show up the day after a major hailstorm. And so the first half hour of my day with Rorik was spent sitting in his office, sort of looking around and observing everything. He had a very complex, like, crop rotation map on his desk, but he's on the phone talking with his insurance agent and other people on his team, trying to navigate his way out of these very trying times of having his crop really threatened by a severe hailstorm. And what I learned in that moment was that an innovation mindset is going to be essential if you are to be successful really at anything in life, but especially in agriculture. There is so much about our world, as you all know, as extension professionals on the front lines, that is changing. And an innovation mindset, by which I mean the ability to be flexible, to pivot as things change from one day to the next, to be able to connect dots that have never been connected before, that is going to separate those who are successful and thrive in this new world and those who struggle. And so, what I hope you walk away from our conversation today with is a better sense of some of the landscape changes that I'm experiencing and that I see others navigating in agriculture. And I also hope it challenges you and opens you up to the possibility that extension is and can be even more impactful in the world of agriculture, even as the landscape changes dramatically. So let me give you a sense of what we're going to be talking about today, and I'll advance the slide here. So there are 5 trends I've picked. I mentioned earlier, these may not be total breakthroughs to you, but I hope it at least gives you a different way of thinking about some of these drivers that I've experienced over the last dozen years or so. Then I want you to think about how your work within extension might intersect, right? Is there an opportunity here for a new service that extension provide? Perhaps it's an area of expertise that you have or someone on your team has that you've never thought about using before in a creative way to help someone in your client base. Maybe it's just an opportunity to sort of dedicate some more time to thinking about these issues that we're going to be describing today. All of those are perfectly valid action steps that I hope you're able to consider taking after our time together today. And then I'm going to share several resources. Melanie has graciously agreed to share this presentation with you all after today's broadcast. And there are links throughout. You're going to see a bunch of icons with different agricultural imagery, and most of those are clickable. And they're going to take you to readings, resources, white papers, videos, things that you can actually use and mull over in the days and weeks ahead. All right, let's dig into the content with a question. So we want this to be interactive. So I want to know, before I share with you sort of the trends that I'm watching very closely, what is a new or emerging ag innovation trend that has you really excited about the future of agriculture? I'm going to take a second and just be quiet. So go ahead and type into the chat. And again, you don't have to work in agriculture or work every day with farmers to be interested in the food system, right? To be interested in things like regenerative ag or climate smart ag, you may be hearing more about. So what's on your mind as it relates to the world of agriculture innovation? I see RNAi pesticides. Awesome, Sarah. Thank you. What else is out there on people's minds? All right, I'm not seeing a lot of action in the chat. That's okay. If you think of other ideas, worker health, absolutely. That's a really, really important one, especially when we think about a changing climate, increased, drought, heat, etc., cold. Absolutely, that's a great one, Eric. Thank you. So yeah, feel free to keep dropping things in the chat. Sustainability practices, 100%. Consumer understanding of sustainability, exactly. How do we tie the dots between the general public and agriculture, and how do we speak the same language as we work toward things like a more sustainable ag system? Climate adaptation and mitigation practices, awesome, Reagan. Agrihoods, neighborhoods, developments based on growing food together, I love that. NESMA program evaluation through Gen AI specific apps, awesome, I love that. Next month, just heads up, we'll have a whole conversation about Gen AI for extension professionals, so really looking forward to diving in there as well. Okay, those are all really, really good. Thank you so much for contributing and helping us learn from each other. Here's why I'm talking about this very briefly. So I'm Nate Burt. I worked, as I mentioned, first in consumer media, so local newspapers, digital media in the St. Louis suburbs, then transitioned to Farm Journal, had zero ag background, and really learned from some tremendous mentors and farmers and ag advisors. And so, what I'm sharing with you today is told to you from the perspective of someone who was an outsider. I don't even know if I'm an insider today, but I think I have maybe some insights or some observations that I made that I hope can be helpful to you. I work with organizations. I'm pleased and privileged to partner with the Extension Foundation on this series, as well as some of the work that's underway within Extension on climate action, on NTAE and ag innovation, etc. So thank you so much for having me and for the partnership. All right, let me give you just a quick preview of where we're headed, and then I will give you some play-by-play of each of these, and I'm going to try to wrap each of these 5 items with some practical either action steps or questions that you can think about after our time together today. So the first innovation I want to focus on, artificial intelligence and automation. Probably no surprise to anyone on this call. Here in Missouri, within Extension and within just the university system in general, artificial intelligence is a huge topic. You may be completely burnt out. I hope not. I think there's a lot of value and opportunity there, but we'll dive in there first. Then we're going to pivot to brain science and social science, nature-based tools and solutions, systemic frameworks, by which I mean connecting disparate industries or ideas or concepts that have typically been siloed or separated, and really breaking down those walls, thinking sort of cross-industry, cross-disciplinary about how to solve big complex problems or issues in agriculture. And then finally, MMRV, which is basically a way that I think I first heard USDA use, but I know others in the private sector even are thinking this way. Basically, how do we use data and other measurement tools to quantify the impact that we're having? How do we really measure whether we are delivering the kind of social good that we're striving for? All right, so let me dig in to AI and automation. And on that point, I see a question in the chat around when is the next AI session happening. I believe these are typically on the 3rd Thursday of the month. I have a slide at the end of the deck where I'll tell you exactly the date and time for that session. So stay tuned, and we'll be sure to get you that information before we leave today. So AI and automation in agriculture, really in any industry, as you all know, is exploding. I think ChatGPT's launch a couple of years back really put this issue on the map, although AI has been integrated into the technologies and platforms we use, even as consumers, for decades. What we're really seeing now is a scaling up of the hardware that's required, right? The chips, the semiconductors, the companies that are making these kinds of investments, the accessibility, the lower cost of resources, et cetera. And so we're sort of in this phase of exponential growth. No one is exactly sure where the cap is on how smart these tools can become, or what they might be capable of. But it seems like there is a continuing upward trajectory, at least for now. So there's tremendous investment generally. That's this first box, generally, which might mean across industries, within all of agriculture, there are various applications. And then we're likely to see specific applications, right? So tools using AI and automation specifically for harvesting specialty crops like tomatoes or berries, for example, things that often have been powered by humans may in fact be, in partnership with machines. Secondly, I think one of the real opportunities with AI is that whether you are talking about farmers and ranchers or crop consultants or manufacturers within agriculture or others, it's really going to help these individuals scale and be in more places at once, right? Jobs that we once believed a human was uniquely capable of doing, perhaps there are applications for machines that we've never considered. And then finally, being able to delegate, being able to manage those things requires us to think in different ways, right? And again, none of this is news to all of you, but I do think agriculture in particular, even myself, I often thought of ag as sort of being maybe one of the last to be, dramatically impacted, just because again we have GPS and a variety of data driven tools already in the field. But now you start thinking about robotics and actually taking AI capabilities and putting that in physical hardware that goes out into the field. The possibilities are pretty staggering. I see lots of conversation in the chat, which is no surprise, right? Predictive analytics with data, absolutely. So much of the decisions in ag today are based on historic data, looking at the past, but being able to look into the future is going to be huge. I see drones, 100%, and then Chat GPT and its latest iteration that rolled out earlier this week with videos, images, actually being able to interact with the world around you. I mean, it's wild. So absolutely love that. Here are just a few cherry picked examples of investment, right? I come from a journalism background, so I like to think about this question of, follow the money, right? What is the money being invested in from federal government, state government, private sector, and what does it tell us about where we're headed as a society and within agriculture? So I'll call out just a few examples here. So in 2021, you see NIFA and the National Science Foundation partnering on AI research institutes. Last year, Agen, a private sector company, getting funding for robotics. You see that again here with FarmNG here in 2024. And then more NSF funding earlier this year. So again, these are just a handful of ag-specific examples, but nonetheless, this is not inconsequential funding, right? This is, $250 million level plus kind of resourcing. So this is one of those slides I was mentioning that we'll share with you after our presentation today. All of these buttons are clickable for various resources. And I wanted to call out the Association of Equipment Manufacturers in particular for the benefit of extension, because this is the association that represents manufacturers of agriculture equipment and technology. They also serve sectors like, mining, forestry, natural resources, etc. And so, I have worked with them in the past as a client, as a partner, as a thought leader partner. One of the articles in here, I think, is a white paper that I gave input on regarding sort of where are these industries and technologies headed over the next decade. I think it's helpful because these companies are sort of on the front lines. I'm not getting paid or anything like that to share this with you, but these are free resources put out by an industry association that's very close to agriculture and other industries. And so I think it's instructive to at least see what's on the minds of these executives and leaders, and really think about, okay, what are the implications for an institution like Extension? Where could we play in this space? Where could we add value to clients who are trying to navigate just the rapidly changing landscape of the tools and resources that are available? So I want to open this up to you all. Think about, knowing what you know about how AI is changing all of our lives, but specifically about the world of agriculture. Think about one kind of client that you serve, right? Maybe it's farmers, maybe it's, crop insurance agents, maybe it's government leaders. Picture one person in mind in that industry that you specifically serve. What is one way you envision AI and automation impacting them? That's the first part of this question. The second part of the question is, how could extension potentially help them navigate that impact, right? If there's anything I worry about as someone who's been in agriculture for over a decade, it is that I think agriculture may be unique because we've already been thinking this way, right? We understand how technology is transforming historically extremely manual labor, very people intensive, resource intensive work, and how could these tools be transformative? I'm not sure if the rest of society has sort of thought about all of those pieces. And so I think extension can play a really key role in helping bridge that transition to whatever comes next with some of these new technologies. So in the chat, let me know, what's one type of extension client that you serve in this vein of agriculture, and how might extension serve them? It doesn't have to be anything you're doing today, but just hypothetically, what could extension do that might be really beneficial? Ooh, nice. So I'm already seeing conversation in the chat. Record keeping on a farm. That's huge, right? In a little bit, when we move into the sort of brain science, social science piece, I'll share some examples from my past life working at Farm Journal and their climate smart ag division called Trust in Food. But one of the things that we discovered there, and that Farm Journal continues to investigate, is this idea of record keeping, right? Today, it is such a burden, generally speaking, for farmers to keep track of all of their data, figure out whether they're capturing the right kinds of information, house that in a place that's accessible and searchable, and use that not only to look at historic trends, but also, as someone shared in the chat earlier, predictively look ahead and say, what should we be thinking about from a planting standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint, from a, livestock herd health standpoint, right? And the list goes on. So other comments that I see in the chat, extension agents using AI to generate recommendations. I love that idea. Planning sessions, troubleshooting technical issues. Absolutely. Again, some farmers are going to want to dig into these tools themselves and have members of their team figure it all out and, build their own GPTs or whatever. But there are an awful lot of farmers out there who just don't have the time or the bandwidth or the interest, frankly. And that's true of any of us in society. Not every topic is going to be universally interesting or helpful, but extension could absolutely step into that role. Public pulling, using extension resources more easily. Yeah, absolutely. Again, just finding creative ways to save time, be more efficient, put those resources into where they need to be, get your clients answers more quickly. Again, I think all of those things are potential use cases that are really, really exciting. Thank you for your comments. Okay. So, before I jump into the next theme here, let me just encourage you a couple pieces. I promised you that for each of these key trends, I would leave you with some questions to think about, right? So one step is not a question, but a recommended action, which is if you're not already using, Chat GPT, Claude, the dozens of other tools that are on the market today, either free or no, or low cost, definitely want you to encourage you to play with it. It doesn't mean you have to like it. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, because as we all know, there are a whole lot of ethical and societal impacts that, again, we're not necessarily taking seriously enough as a society writ large. And so think about these things through the context of ethics, of the right ways that we could use these tools and potential misapplications that we should be avoiding and talking about together. And then think about how could I weave this in, again, according to whatever guidelines and protocols you have as an extension employee, as a university employee, et cetera. Obviously, there are rules and restrictions that we all have to follow to be good stewards of our organizations. And there may be opportunities to start thinking about ways to use these resources and help your clients through future grant applications or through future projects or initiatives that you are proposing or actively have in the field. And then secondly, again, play with the tools, imagine where you could plug in. I think that's going to, again, just help you start thinking proactively about how to leverage these and also help your clients navigate these changes that are coming. All right. Second trend I want to talk about a little bit is brain science and social science. So human decisions, this is no surprise to anyone who has children or is married or works in an office. Human decisions are often a black box, right? We would love to be able to say, hey, I understand exactly the motivations, the neurotransmitters, the experiences from way back when that have informed the choices that people around me are making. Unfortunately, we don't have a great way to unlock that black box today, but based on emerging research and, again, studies that have been going on for quite some time, it seems like we are getting increasingly greater visibility into how the brain functions, how people make decisions. What we're not doing today is the second piece, which is using these insights to unlock change in an industry like agriculture, for example. For example, how do people make a decision to implement a climate smart practice on their farm, as an example? How do people decide whether or not cover crops are going to go into their rotation next fall or spring? How do people decide whether to experiment with a biological tool, recognizing it may or may not work? Those are the kinds of questions that, if we had more visibility into the kinds of factors people consider, we might be able to better equip communicators, extension professionals, et cetera, to provide insights, resources, coaching, troubleshooting that would help address some of those pain points that people experience when they're making decisions. that would empower them to make choices that are better for their families, their communities, their businesses, and more broadly for the environment and society. And so I think it's really exciting. Neuroscience and, neuromarketing is something that the private sector has been using for quite some time. You think about Disney or Netflix or McDonald's or, any large company is typically going to use big data. They're going to use the latest science about how people respond and make decisions in their marketing. I think it's time that we started using those tools more broadly in, across places like Extension and across, the nonprofit world to really start, again, making decisions that could be beneficial for agriculture and for greater society. The last point I have on here is that there are already some really exciting things happening. I just called out one example that's I'm biased because I have a connection to Washington State University. Dr. Paul Bowles, who works at the Murrow Center for Media and Health Promotion Research, was one of my graduate advisors while I was working on my master's program. And some really interesting work happening there around the science of the brain, connecting people in a laboratory, a scientifically credible setting to, get brain waves, skin conductivity, and expose them to specific media messages. A lot of Dr. Bowles' work and his team has involved health messages, right? So smoking, for example, or making different choices with your health. And there's also great interest in taking this to other applications like agriculture, right? How do we make more sustainable choices? How do we talk about those conversations with farmers or other decision makers? Dr. Linda Prokopi is another one at Purdue that comes to mind, and I'm sure there are many others that I haven't had the privilege of meeting yet. But at any rate, those are the kinds of things that I think we can do a better job in agriculture of leveraging those insights and, again, connecting those dots to some of the biggest challenges that an industry like agriculture faces. I think we're starting to see trends that are going in the right direction here. And again, this is just a sampling for your interest and enjoyment. But we see here back at last year, NIH and USDA partnering on a program called Dual Purpose with Dual Benefit that sort of hits at the intersection of human health and more resilient agriculture system. Some of you may follow Elon Musk, quite a character. I won't offer any commentary in any direction other than to say that what he and his team are doing with Neuralink, which is where you essentially take technology and wire it to the brain, especially right now for people who might be differently abled. Perhaps they don't have use of arms or hands or legs, and being able to allow them to think a thought and then have that respond in the real world through a machine or through a computer. I suspect that throughout agriculture and throughout society, those kinds of tools are going to be more widely available with applications we probably haven't even imagined yet. But again, it's going to give us more visibility into use cases and opportunities. So something to follow and pay attention to, and lots of ethical conversations we could have, but nonetheless, something of interest. And then I mentioned trust in food earlier. So again, this is the background that I come from. And a lot of the work that Trust in Food is doing sort of takes big data, understanding how farmers think about the world through engagements with things like, websites about agricultural articles, survey responses from original research, asking farmers and ranchers how they think and feel about specific issues. This particular report that I've linked to here was done with the Sustainability Consortium, which is a sustainability association and network for sustainability professionals across a variety of industries, CPGs, so, food retailers, Target, World Wildlife Fund, Wrangler Jeans, and many, many more. So basically people who get together and think about sustainability and making progress and really understanding these issues and understanding how to make environmental progress in partnership with consumers, with farmers, etc. This particular study looked at row crop farmers and hog producers, and sort of looks at this idea of, what do you need to collect more data, better data about your sustainability practices? What are the barriers that you're facing? And what would it take for you to do more? Are you hearing from the market that, your buyers of your pork or your grain want this kind of data? If wanted more of it, would you be able to provide it? So, studies like this one are an example of efforts across the agriculture industry to really get a better sense of how people are thinking. I think once you start layering uh, additional brain science and neuroscience on top of some of that, self-reported data, that's when we start to unlock a lot of these sort of next level insights that may help us better understand how to advance, whether it's hunger or productivity in agriculture or greater environmental stewardship. Keep an eye on this space because I think it's only going to get more exciting and more insightful as time goes on. I've linked to a couple of reports here. I won't dwell on that, but I hope you find that helpful. And then before I dive into our next chat question for the group, just a couple of things. I would encourage you to do some research or asking around. If you don't know someone within your corner of extension who's working on social science or brain science issues, find a buddy, right, in your area or across the extension system. I see some comments in the chat about Paul and others who are doing this kind of work, not just in ag, but also in immunization, education, and health. Get to know some of the research they're doing. See if you can connect with them. Ask questions. Think about what this kind of information would unlock or allow you to do as an extension professional in the work that you do. And then finally, think about what's missing, right? As you look across agriculture, what kinds of insights would be really helpful in moving the needle on a specific aspect of the work that you do, right? Whether that's farmers or crop consultants or government leaders who are guiding policy around agriculture. What gaps do you see that extension could potentially fill with its insights of local communities, with its educational and research expertise, etc. So just some things to keep in mind in this space. Okay, before we dive into the next trend, I would love to hear from you. How are you all within your part of extension or within your university either actively applying social science or maybe thinking about it, right? Maybe some of the use cases you're considering. So go ahead and type into the chat, and you can also say we're not doing anything, but it's interesting, like we're curious about it. So let me know where your head is at on social science in the chat. Okay, so I see nothing presently. That is totally fine, and I suspect a lot of people are probably in that boat. So again, some work with a social scientist, Reagan. Awesome, thank you. So yeah, I mean, I think it's not very widespread today, right? There is some of this work happening in pockets, but it's not widespread, and this is not a commentary on extension. It's just a commentary about the research overall and just the connections that we haven't made yet as a society that I think can really be powerful. Identifying how messaging around IPM, integrated pest management, affects how farmers adopt or don't adopt practices. I love that. IPM is huge. That's really, really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. A lot, actually. Nebraska has several programming teams focused in this space. Ooh, Carrie, we should talk. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Paula is a social scientist. Hey, welcome. I hope I have represented you and your colleagues well, and I love the work that you're doing, and really fascinated to hear from folks like you. So thank you for that. All right, I am going to continue into trend number 3, but again, feel free to keep those comments coming in the chat, and don't hesitate to ask questions. Right, this is your time. I want to make sure that whatever I can offer provides value to you. Okay. Number 3, nature-based solutions and tools. So again, I don't know that any of this is a surprise if you all are new to agriculture. Certainly happy to clarify any of these points. But something that's been happening for several years now, and I think is only going to accelerate as more research and data is done into the use cases of these technologies, is the pivot, us, whether it's government or the nonprofit sector or private sector, and new solution farmers and agriculture, is this idea of nature-based solutions and tools. This is something that basically is the idea of shifting away from synthetic. Excuse me for one moment. One of the joys of my job is that I get to work with my children, and occasionally there are interruptions, even though I have asked them to, yeah, give me some privacy. So give me one moment. I will be right back. Well, I thought we were going to get away with this second session about not having that, but we had it. So thank you for your kind words of support. Reagan says it's like a built-in break. Yeah, if someone needs a drink or to go to the restroom, feel free. You all are wonderful. Melanie and I were talking. Extension is a very, very gracious, family-oriented community. I'm so grateful to you. Thank you. So I mentioned this idea of transitioning from manufacturing of synthetic chemicals, et cetera. I'm thinking specifically of like pesticides or fungicides in agriculture, and really bringing in learnings from nature about how do plants take care of themselves in nature. Are there elements that we can find that we could somehow create those things or follow those processes to strengthen the resilience of soil, improve crop health, and really transition in some cases away from more of those synthetic chemicals into products and ingredients that are better for the soil, maybe have a lower environmental footprint, etc. Um, and this has applications across agriculture for biodiversity benefits, addressing climate change, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, human health. I mean, this is even a trend in food and the far end of the food supply chain, right? When you talk about the ingredients that are going into consumer facing food products and really beyond. And as I mentioned, it spans a variety of segments. So if we go to the next slide here, these are just a few examples of where I see investment happening in this space, not just financial investment, but really public facing initiatives to really dive deeper into this idea of what can we learn from nature that we could pull into agriculture as an industry to really improve society. The White House released a report in 2022, opportunities to accelerate nature-based solutions. Again, so the highest levels of government here in the United States thinking about this question, all the way to the World Health Organization that same year, focusing on nature-based solutions in human health. Last year, UMass Amherst introducing a Center for Braiding Indigenous Knowledges and Science, so really leveraging insights and expertise of Indigenous people who have been using these tools and resources and ways of doing things for thousands of years. And then this year, startups like Cultivo getting, millions of dollars in investment in the private sector for tools that really help us better understand what's happening in nature. Another example would be in the nonprofit side, you have organizations like the Soil Health Institute, which is really a body of researchers trying to unlock more details about how the soil functions. There's so much we don't know about the ground beneath our feet. I think the more that what we see in the market today is that we're going to have more innovation and insights that are going to help us be better stewards, that are going to help us understand the various ways microorganisms and other components of the soil and air and water work together. And there's a societal mandate to do that, right? I mean, we think about, nutrient loss reduction strategies in states like Illinois and Iowa, where there's a large amount of livestock and row crop production. So, people are paying attention to these issues. They want answers, not just in agriculture, but in general society. And so extension can really, I think, lean into this, given its many diverse areas of expertise, to really help, again, advance some of these solutions and get data and insights to determine which ones actually work and how do we measure what's functioning properly. Again, a couple of studies for you to click on at your convenience. I think at least one from the journal Nature. The last piece I would say on this one is just a couple of pieces, right? One of them is just a takeaway, which is on this third trend, nature-based solutions are expanding. The toolbox that your clients within Extension, the toolbox they have to work with is growing, right? I think it's really prudent for Extension as a professional in this space, especially if you work in agriculture, to think about how to distinguish the reputation, the credibility, the brand that Extension has, and pair that with these sort of emerging innovations from the field. One of the areas that I just throw out there, from my experience working with Extension over the years, is that you have a great way of taking insights and expertise from the university level, from research, et cetera, and translating that in a way that people can listen, can learn from, can understand, help them make decisions in a science-based lens. Um, and I'll be honest, I think there's a lot of concern, especially among farmers, but probably more broadly across agriculture, like help me understand what are the standouts, right? What are the tools that actually work that we have data to support? Um, things that we weren't able to use earlier, but they have a better environmental footprint. They help my crops be more productive. They're better for the water. So help me distinguish those standouts from snake oil, frankly, right? Things that don't work, things that are, being sold to me all the time, right? As a farmer, I can't keep up with it all. Extension, I think, has a tremendous ability to sort of separate the signal from the noise and support producers, for example, in that journey. So again, that's just one use case. I'm confident there are many others. Just something to be thinking about, right? How do we help people navigate this increasingly nature-based space? How do we figure out what's actually going to help them and what's going to be just a distraction? Okay, fourth trend, issues-based problem solving. This is an area that Extension already shines in. And so I'm just going to sort of double down on this because I think you all know it really, really well. What I mean by this is that within agriculture historically, as agriculture professionals or lifers have talked to me about it, people in agriculture see it as a small community, right? It's a nurturing community. It's everybody knows everybody. Those are some of the terms you often hear, and I'm sure that's true in other industries as well. But given what a small percentage of the U.S. population is actively involved in ag production, there's some truth to that, right? The data supports that. On the other hand, what I see happening on the landscape is that increasingly, sort of the insular walls of agriculture or forestry or human health or nutrition or whatever, those walls are being broken down because the challenges that we're facing as a society, whether you think about climate or equity or nutrition or crop productivity or animal health and well-being, these are issues that require a multidisciplinary approach. And it's exciting to me to see that the private sector and nonprofits and government agencies working together more collaboratively. And Extension, is a leader in this space, right? In a variety of topics and applications. And so I think this is a real opportunity for you all to continue shining in agriculture, because I think in a lot of cases, there are an enormous number of private sector companies trying to figure this out, right? They want to be seen as adding value beyond just making a profit, right? They want to work with academia. They want to work with the nonprofit community, but they don't know where to start. And so it may be an opportunity for Extension to step in and say, well, we have some ideas. Let us show you what we're doing. And let's think together about, creatively how we could start connecting some of these dots. Okay. So I see a note from Melanie. Thank you, Melanie. You got about 15 minutes, 30 minutes left, right? We're going to do a few more minutes on trends, and then we're going to open it up for conversation. So definitely keep those questions coming. Keep your comments coming in the chat, and we will get to as many of those as we possibly can. We'll also have a couple of surveys to fill out, one from Melanie and Extension Foundation that I'll encourage you to take first. And then I have a little survey at the end. If you're willing to do so, I would be grateful. The QR code you can scan with your phone and just answer a few questions real quick. Okay, so, holistic problem solving is going to be an increasing skill set. It's something that I'm thinking a lot about as the dad of 4 kids who are not yet in high school. How do I equip them to think broadly like this? Certainly AI and other tools will help, but it's also a very human-centered challenge and also a very human-centered opportunity. Okay, let me just give you a couple of examples. These are not agriculture specific examples, but I think they show a trend that's pointing in this direction. So something I learned about recently is the Solutions Journalism Network, which was interesting to me as a former journalist and a lifelong communicator. This is basically a group of journalists who are working together on issues, right? It's not necessarily like the New York Times is going to go solve hunger, or, the Washington Post is going to go address this multi-part series on, the next pandemic or whatever. This is groups of journalists and communicators who are rallying around specific issues and really thinking about how does the art of storytelling, the art of communication, advance progress in a specific area where society needs help. Um, and so I love that model. I haven't seen a whole lot of folks doing that. But again, I think that because of the nature of extension, the multidisciplinary nature, the geographic distribution, the diversity that exists and that will continue to grow within extension, those are natural advantages that you have in agriculture for addressing some of these issues. A World Economic Forum released a report about systems mapping and sort of connecting dots between disparate ideas. Again, you can click on these and view them at your leisure. But I think, again, these are indicators of future opportunities. And then finally, I included a few details here. There's a book that I've included here called Mega Threats by Nouriel Roubini. He is an economist. So if you bear with some of his writing, which tends to be very financial and technical in nature, and most of it goes over my head, what he argues in that book, which I think is prudent to this fourth trend here, which is sort of connecting the dots, is that we are entering an era of, on the one hand, unprecedented, wealth and relative peace, globally speaking. On the other hand, the challenges that we face are becoming increasingly interwoven, and so you can think about, with a changing climate, scientists indicate that there are likely to be more global pandemics, for example. With the rise of AI, there are going to be lots of benefits, some of which we've talked about today for agriculture, and also the increased risk of bad actors using those tools to, run influence campaigns and, publish deepfakes and, create, biohazardous material in a lab and distribute that widely, right? So basically the book argues like there are all these factors converging at once, and so I think you can do two things with that book. One would be to like never sleep again, right? Because the book kind of freaked me out when I read it. On the other hand, you can say, well, if we are entering this space of, unprecedented, wealth and opportunity, and also unprecedented risk, given some of these emerging threats, how can extension be thinking proactively, serving its clients to be resilient, right? I really think that goes back to the conversation at the very beginning of our talk today, which is, innovation mindset is so important, right? So whether you're Rorik Paulman in Nebraska experiencing the hailstorm, trying to get through that, or you're on the cutting edge of technology, thinking about new use cases for your clients, you as Extension have a responsibility to study the landscape, not in a fear-based way, but in a mindset of abundance, right? How can Extension be a resource? How can we continue to be valuable and relevant to our clients? And again, I think this is a really exciting opportunity to continue connecting the dots and helping bridge government and private sector, et cetera, with the unique expertise, educational capabilities, et cetera, that Extension offers. Okay, last trend, and then we will turn the floor over to all of you. So this framework, MMRV, which stands for Measurement, Monitoring, Reporting, and Verification, is one that I first heard of via USDA. I think it was through when I was at Farm Journal working with the team there to design a climate smart commodities project that was eventually funded. One of the things that was part of that RFP process was helping USDA get a better sense of the kinds of data and insights that could be gathered to demonstrate throughout the project progressively whether progress is being made, right? Are we having the impact that we set out to have? This is very sticky, right? As you all know who have worked on grants or manage your own projects, grant funded or not, being able to document some of these issues that are probably going to take years to implement. Obviously, all of us want society to change positively faster, but realistically, how do you measure whether the climate change communications you're doing is making a difference, right? How do we measure whether human health is progressing in the way that we would like it to? My business coach likes to talk about key indicators of progress. Like, what are the mindsets that are shifting? What are the conversations we're having that are maybe easier or different? I think all of this is captured in this concept of MMRV, right? How do we better use data to demonstrate along the way, not just at the end of a project, but along the way that we're making progress? How do we make better, more strategic decisions for agriculture in this use case? and again, use the tools that we have without getting so overwhelmed that we just give up, right? So here are some examples of tools that are starting to come into this space. And again, keep in mind, I come to this from sort of a social impact, climate, other kinds of issues perspective. Clarity AI, years ago in 2017, seems like years ago, right? It really wasn't that long ago. Um, Developed tools for evaluating social impact for financial professionals, right? So if I'm an investment advisor, how do I quickly scan the landscape and figure out which companies to recommend my clients include in their portfolio based on their social impact? So this idea of using data to inform decision making is not new, but the granularity of the data is improving and the decision making tools are expanding. Last year, USDA invested $300 million in getting better carbon data, specifically for, again, many of the projects that it's funding, work that's happening around the private sector. Really lots of people are curious about, soil carbon sequestration or other kinds of how carbon moves through a landscape. And then Nature published an article related to the food system, looking at data and evaluating the health of global food systems, right? North America versus South America, United States versus China, things of that nature. So again, these are all clickable. I encourage you to spend time, with them and learning from them. But those are the kinds of things that suggest to us that data and data-driven decision making and reporting out on a more regular basis is going to be an important part of agriculture. And of course, this is true for farmers too, right? I think farmers continue to look for the day when premiums are offered for better data, right? There are some narrow cases, specific supply chains that are doing this, but it's not a broad trend that we've seen yet, even though we've been talking about it for years and years. Perhaps better data will allow us to do that. Um, Again, here are some additional links to check out. Again, IBM, major global company investing in this space, instrumental, more of a startup, grant seeking technology. These are all looking for ways to make data more actionable and to, again, just help you as an extension professional or help your clients in agriculture really use data for greater good. So a couple things I would leave you with as we conclude these 5 trends and move into our Q&A session. Number one, ask yourself as an extension professional, what data do you have today within your corner of extension that is being underutilized, right? I know from conversations that I've had within extension and with other clients outside of extension, there's an awful lot of great work you all are doing. It is so difficult to find the time, the expertise you need, the talent, the mental energy and stamina to go through and figure out what data do I have on project A, B, and C, right? How do I develop systems so that I can progressively capture data and insights from the clients that we're serving, from, people who came to project meetings or surveys we got back? How do we start compiling all of this in a way that allows us to talk to the broader extension system, that allows us to talk to our land grant, that allows us to talk to prospective funders, right, about the impact that we're having. Data will only grow in importance in terms of funding decisions and determining whether resources are being deployed strategically. And so the first step is just like, what's on the shelf, right? I don't need to do anything with it yet. I just need to know what might be there that we could dig into at some point to start, laying the case, whether it's through videos or articles or internal reports. Just having some sense, or maybe even a dashboard in Excel, right, with like the 3 key things we look for in any project that can help us track whether this project is going the way we hoped, and we can pivot if needed if it's not going the way that we hoped. So think about that. And then the second piece would be, if we were building such a dashboard to track progress of a specific project or across all of the work that we're doing, like, what would the dashboard say? What factors would we want to calculate or monitor, right? It doesn't have to be something that requires a $1 million new tool or a lot of overhead work and time. It might be something more basic, right? Are we having more conversations about what comes next in this project? Are farmers able to better answer this question on their own? Are we getting more requests for, helping farmers actually implement a practice, not just figure out which funding opportunity is right for them? So again, these are all hypothetical examples, but the more that you can start to give yourself those quick wins, again, this will help your work in agriculture specifically, just because it is so integrated with data already, and that import is only going to grow. All right, So those are the 5 trends. I hope that has been helpful to you, or maybe reinforcing of some of the things you're working on. I'm going to pause now. As I noted earlier, Melanie has just dropped in the chat a quick survey from Extension Foundation. Please go ahead while you're on this call right now and fill that form out in the background. I'll pull up a slide here in a minute with my quick survey with a QR code on it, but go ahead and do the Extension Foundation version first. Let me stop there. I want to take your questions now. You can see I've got one here on the screen. What might be Extension's roles in helping clients navigate ag innovation? So feel free, drop a comment in the chat, raise your hand, and also ask other questions. I'm here to help. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions yet. That's okay. I bet it's because everyone is filling out the survey, which is awesome. Thank you. You guys are awesome. You're wonderful. Um, so please go ahead. Feel free to drop comments, questions in the chat. One of the things that I think is really exciting to me as someone who came to agriculture as an outsider is the capacity for extension to help. I mentioned large farm operations earlier, but I think just the diversity that exists within U.S. agriculture. Um, you all know the data better than I do, but we see more people of diverse racial backgrounds, diverse age backgrounds, diverse experience backgrounds entering this space. Certainly, I think COVID and seeing some of the supply chain challenges that we experienced woke people up to this idea. Um, but I think it goes beyond that, right? We see generational transitions that are on the horizon. Moving farmland from one generation to the next. We see lots more, people who are interested in saying, I want to be part of the solution, right? Understanding the role that agriculture can play in climate and regenerative ag, et cetera. So again, all of those things I think are going to be really great drivers. And I think extension is really well equipped, whatever the size of the farm operation, whatever someone's background, helping make agriculture accessible, helping tap into some of these trends is going to be really, really powerful. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my slide with a quick QR code survey. This just helps me do a better job fine-tuning these presentations to be beneficial to all of you. I'm an outsider, right? I don't work as an extension employee, and so it's really helpful to me to get your perspective on what's working and what's not. We are going to be here for the next 10 or 15 minutes, just depending on what kinds of questions there are, et cetera. I will call out while I'm waiting to see if there's any questions or comments that June 20th is when we will be meeting again, 1 p.m. Central Time, if I recall correctly, talking about ethical AI utilization. So sort of taking today's conversation and really diving deeper, not with an agriculture focus, but just as an extension professional. What are we seeing out there? How can you start using these tools and integrating them, again, within the confines of the ethical and organizational boundaries that you may have? I'm excited about that. I've been using AI tools since basically the time I started my consulting business almost 2 years ago. And I'm learning something new every day. And I'm sure all of you who are using these tools are as well. Melanie, let me throw this to you real quick. Any questions that came up in the chat that maybe I overlooked, or any thoughts that you had, going through people's comments in the chat?
No, I don't think so. I was so glad to see all the different examples of all the work that people are doing across extension and how it overlaps with even the work that I'm doing. So,
Yeah, that's awesome, Melanie. I love that. And thank you for that comment. I think that's so true. Like, I really just appreciate everyone's participation. One last request I would make as you're finishing those surveys, if there are resources, websites, Facebook pages, whatever, that you and Extension are working on that may be tied into one of the topics we addressed today, drop that into the chat. I think one of the virtues of Extension, this community, is that you do a really great job convening and bringing people together. Um, and and I think it's really helpful to share like cross pollinate ideas, right? So one of the things I've always loved about agriculture is that it is such a wide open space, right? Everything from cows to sheep to fish to timber, all the way to the food supply chain, like restaurants and food companies. There's so much to learn, and you all have such depth of background and projects that you're working on. Again, I had no idea about some of the social science work, for example, that's happening. So again, if you have any links or resources, drop those into the chat. Also, plug for Connect Extension. Spend some time there, cross-pollinating ideas. Uh, Gabriella, we will be sure to get you a link for the June 20th session. Melanie, I'll follow up with you after this to make sure Gabriella gets that, and anyone else who might need it. Linda, thanks for the kind words. Really glad you were able to get some good information to consider in your roles. All right, I'm going to do one last call for any comments, questions. Oh, fantastic. Melanie has dropped in the chat the registration link for the AI session coming up next month. Maybe the last observation I make, and Melanie, we may end up closing out early if no one has any more comments or questions, which is totally fine. Um, you know, as someone who has lived in rural America for, over a decade, my family and I moved to a small farm about a year ago. And our neighbor Roy is a cow calf farmer, does row crops, the most generous guy you could ever want to know. And I'm sure we've driven him nuts because we've been, experimenting with regenerative grazing with our dairy and beef cows. Trying to start setting up raised bed gardens and greenhouses. And so there have been times when the cows have escaped, and he's had to help us herd them back in. And among other issues where it's like, Roy came over and baled all of our hay for us and stacked it. And again, things that we didn't have the capacity to do. That spirit of generosity is one of Extension's superpowers, right? And you all know this, but there is real value that you have, right? So as you're leaving today's session, just remember to take that power with you, right? Things are changing rapidly. There's lots of these new innovations we've talked about and many others we didn't mention. But keep infusing what you do with that spirit of generosity and giving, right? Also valuing what you do, right? In terms of getting funding for your work and helping your farmers and other clients. But again, don't lose that. Like, it's important. I don't think Extension gets to hear that enough, like the impact that you have, that sort of neighborly, helpful approach that you take, grounded in science and research and data. So thank you. I do see a comment here from Eric. Eric asks, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how Extension can serve as a grant hub for communities who may not have the capacity to apply for or manage grants. Ooh, that's interesting. Thank you for the question, Eric, first of all. I would love to explore this further with you. Off the cuff, I would say a couple of things. In the work that I do with clients who are typically in academia or nonprofits or some for-profits, the number one thing that I do that people love to talk about for good reason, right, is the world of grants, right? Grant strategy. How do we go about finding grants and funding? How do we get capacity to actually go seek a grant? Like, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to do the research. I need help doing the writing. Like, help me understand how much time is this going to take? What are the barriers, the pros and cons? Eric, you know better than anyone. It's a complex process, right? You raise a really interesting point about Extension as a hub for capacity building for communities. I would say a couple of things. In my business, what I've done is to say, these are the pieces of grants that I do really well. And then there are pieces that I'm aware of, and I need to know the process, right, from end to end. How do you go find a grant? How do you build it? How do you propose it to a funder? And then how do you start implementing it, assuming you're successfully funded? And so I've tried to demarcate for my clients, and I think maybe the same could be true for Extension. These are the pieces where we really play well, right? So I think, first of all, it's about Extension getting together, either across the system or in the state of Oregon, or maybe it's a multi-state collaboration. And really identifying, okay, if we want to be a grants hub to some degree, whatever that means, why do we want to do this, right? Where do we see the need? Are we hearing it from, local government, local nonprofits, businesses that are trying to get a leg up? So that's number one. I think the more you can niche down and define specific client audiences that you're serving, that would be the first step. And the reason I say that is that it's not to exclude all of the other people who might need help with grants, but it's just going to give you that kind of narrow focus that you need to take those next steps. What I see too often in the world of grants is that people are super excited, they want to learn it all, and then when they learn it all, they get overwhelmed, and it's like, it's so complicated, I don't even want to bother. Um, like anyone who's in a grant knows that it's very complicated, and sometimes you probably want to look for the escape door. So I think really niching down to a specific client audience is really important. Then I think it's a matter of, okay, what's sort of like we talked about in the first session a month ago. For those who didn't get a chance to join that one, go back and listen. We talked a lot about inventorying the assets and resources that your extension office or team or system brings to the table, right? What is the brain power that we bring? What are the resources, existing projects or programs we could leverage or learn from? What are the partners that we have outside of extension that we could bring to the table? So that's number two, really taking an audit of like what services, what talent, skills, resources do we have? And then it's a matter of number three, okay, what services do we provide? Um, so that could be, for example, it could be, okay, grants research, right? So there are some really powerful AI tools like Instrumental that I mentioned earlier, not getting a kickback, not getting paid, have experimented with their free online tool. It's an example of like the best online tool I've found for data-driven grant seeking. So maybe we have a service where we're coaching people how to use that. Maybe we decide that we're going to do the research for them and we're going to give them the top 10 or top 5 best grants to go after given your priorities as an organization. So that's number three, really getting clear on the services that you provide. And if you are working with multiple extension offices, maybe one of you is the researcher, another one is the writer, and then a third one, is sort of doing that final checklist of did you get all of your commitment letters? Is your budget built properly? Have you thought about X, Y, and Z, right? So there may be like a consultative aspect, a writing aspect, a research aspect. And again, I'm sort of walking you through the framework that I use in my organization just because I think extension has these capabilities and can do so at scale, right? And then finally, I would think about, okay, once an award is funded, is there a role extension wants to play in helping to actually implement that work, right? So are we giving them feedback on, how to find the right team members to put on this project, or how to manage your budget, or how to leverage your time to be able to do everything else that your organization already does, plus the grant. So at any rate, I hope that's helpful. Thanks for the kind words in the chat. I think there's a lot of potential for extension to do this. And I realize, with an extension or any institution, time is valuable, right? Time is precious and you don't have a lot of it. So I think just chunking it out like that and starting the conversation off with, do we want to be in the grant hub space at all? Why, right? Answer that question first. Then which audiences are we going to serve? What talent and expertise do we have? What services are we going to provide? And give yourself a timeline and then just start to work through that and see what comes of it, right? I love the idea. And again, would love to be a sounding board if you ever have want to bounce ideas off. But I think that could be really powerful, right? In agriculture and for other industries that you serve. All right. Any other thoughts, questions, comments before we check out for today? All right. Well, Melanie, I'm not seeing any others, so I'm going to thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here. Excited to be back next month to talk more deep dive on AI applications for extension professionals. And with that, I'm going to hand the floor back over to Melanie.
Thank you all so much, and especially thank you to Nate for covering so much ground and sharing his experience and knowledge and making it so interactive. If you haven't taken the survey, it's a quick 4 questions, and also Nate has his QR code, so those are 2 different surveys. We would love to hear your feedback so we can plan, how to make these sessions and all our professional development relevant to you in the future. So I hope you guys can join us next time. We have the registration in the chat, and as a reminder, all this information and the recording will be going out to you early next week. So thank you guys so much, and I hope you have the great rest of your Thursday, and we'll see you next time.